All right, guys, so I am going to continue with what we were talking about in class, and I'm only going to spend 10 minutes. I'm going to time myself and then finish. So you won't get bored and you can watch it again if you need to. So we already mentioned that Lyndon Johnson decided he would not run again in 1968, and his vice presidential nominee, Hubert Humphrey, was not elected. Nixon was elected president in 1968. 1968 in general was a really dramatic political time. This actually is an image of Robert F. Kennedy, JFK's brother. JFK was obviously already dead at this point, right? Looking at some of the carnage that resulted from urban riots, right? Particularly racial riots that took place in cities in the North. All right, this is actually an image of Robert F. Kennedy right after he was assassinated. And then this is also an image of some racial riots that took place in 1968. All right, Martin Luther King was assassinated in Memphis in April 1968. Again, I talked about Robert F. Kennedy already. Robert F. Kennedy also, when he was running for president, when he was assassinated, he was running on an anti-war platform. RFK, as we can call him, actually reached out to a very wide audience. He appeared to be unbeatable, but and he won the California primary, and then he was assassinated. Okay, so you could definitely think about the degree of threat that he posed to the pro-war element of the United States population. All right, the Democratic Convention was definitely a huge violent scene. There was a lot of confrontation between people who were taking place in the Democratic National Convention and the police. And a lot of young people were continuing to take to the streets, demand change. So there was a lot of violence, a lot of uprising in 1968. Okay, I apologize, I should have prepped you for this image. This is the My Lai massacre, as the slide clearly indicates. Okay, so how do we make sense of these images? It's kind of hard to do so. But the My Lai massacre was an event that took place in 1967, actually, but it was not actually released to American papers until a year later. How do we make sense of this event? Now maybe you understand a little bit about why I was so upset that I was not able to look at the memorial of this shooting, and I apologize, I was wrong with my dates. It was 1968 that the shootings took place, and 1969, finally, that the news reached the United States. Okay, so what was the My Lai massacre? Well, it was essentially an invasion of some small hamlet-type villages in Vietnam. This was where the U.S. GIs were ordered to kill everyone in the village, women, children, elderly. Ultimately, the justification was that they were all Viet Cong. Right? And so you just saw these just mass executions. And why are these photos, why are we looking at these, you might ask? Well, partly because I do fundamentally believe that you need to see them to understand how graphic they really were. This is an image of one of the first images of these bodies laying strewn on a path going into the village. When this was released to the American public and the news, there was even more of an anti-war uproar. And this is in 1969 that this occurs. Okay, finished with that. All right, anti-war protests obviously are going to continue to escalate, as I was saying, particularly in universities. This is an image from the Kent State protests, right, or the Kent State Massacre, it is occasionally known as. Although just like the Boston Massacre, you could definitely argue that this is an exaggeration. Why? Because not a very large number of people died, I suppose. So Kent State, ultimately, there were a number of student protesters, and the National Guard broke out in fire, and 4 students were shot, and a number of other students were injured. This kind of epitomized the dichotomy between the anti-war and pro-war protests, right? So when Nixon was elected, what he does is he actually escalates even further. And actually, it's interesting because Nixon is kind of withdrawing the presence from Vietnam, and he's escalating the presence in Cambodia. So he's bombing Cambodia, and at the same time starting to bring home GIs from Vietnam. So on the one hand, he's appearing particularly popular because he's doing what all these protesters want, but at the same time, he is escalating bombing in Cambodia, which is a country right next to Vietnam. We will look at it on a map, but you guys have Google. You could look on it on a map as well. Okay, 4 minutes left. This is an image actually of ping pong diplomacy. No better word for it. In 1972, the doors to China reopened, right? So what does that mean? Remember that during the Cultural Revolution, China was literally cut off from the rest of the West. In addition to having Nixon visit Beijing in 1972, we also had these ping pong matches that took place, which was really interesting because what that was, I mean, yes, it's literally just a ping pong tournament, but it ultimately was a demonstration of the ability of a capitalist country and a communist country to work together. All right, so here's Nixon meeting Chairman Mao. So again, I kind of already talked about that, but this was a monumental moment in Chinese-American relations. And we'll talk about it more in class. Okay, domestic affairs. One of the most significant domestic affairs occurs in 1969 with the moon landing, which I guess you could say accomplished JFK. Although he was dead, it accomplished JFK's mission of having a man walk on the moon. And also, it was a victory, of course, figuratively for the Cold War. And we will talk a lot more about Watergate in class tomorrow, but Watergate, you could argue, was Nixon's ultimate downfall, obviously. What the background is that he orders this illegal surveillance on a number of citizens. Essentially, he's spying specifically on the Committee for the Re-election of the President, or CREEP is the acronym. What he gets caught for is that he arguably was affiliated with a break-in of the Watergate apartment complex, or the Watergate Hotel, and he also denied that he was involved in this. And the White House then tried to cover up the involvement in the Watergate scandal. But then there were these two reporters, their names were Woodward and Bernstein, who followed back up with this cover-up attempt, released a lot of information, and Nixon, the reason why he resigned was because he figured he would be impeached if he did not resign, all right? So that was a really quick version of the rest of the chapter. I hope that this is helpful. Feel free to watch it again. If you have questions in particular, things that I didn't explain very well, feel free to ask. I know that there are a lot more nuances, a lot more details that I did not get into, but realize that we need to read and kind of scrutinize a lot of this information on our own. I will certainly try to be a little bit more deliberate in terms of giving you like different kinds of multiple choice questions that you should be prepared for, but also there are certain things that you need to know yourself. So anyway, I really hope this was helpful. Good luck with your sports competitions today, and I'll see you tomorrow.